Hi guys, this is Andy, the Expedition Hiker, and today we're talking about tents. This is a beginner's guide of how to put up a tent and where to put your tent. Today we're using the Vango Banshee 300, but all tents have the same principles of how to set them up. So without further ado, here we go. So guys, the first thing we really need to do is think about where we're going to pitch our tent before we actually put the tent up. So what we really need to be looking at is a few principles for the best site or the best pitch. So we need to think about wind direction. You need to think about where the wind is coming from. Can you get any shelter from the wind? Also, what you want to do when you're putting your tent up, you want to see the direction the wind is coming towards you, and that's the direction you want to put the rear of your tent. So the back end of the tent faces the wind. After that, we need to really look for a reasonable flat ground. So you're looking for an area that's hasn't got too many slopes. You don't want to be hanging off the edge of a cliff, and you need to find somewhere that's nice and soft. Now, it does mean that if you're on the tracks in the summer or anything else, the ground might be a bit hard or a bit rocky, but you want to try and look for a bit softer ground. Obviously, you're going to be sleeping on this ground, so a little bit of comfort, but not too wet. So the first thing we want to do is, once we've found our pitch, we need to look around to see if there's no rocks, no sticks, and no old tent pegs from a previous tent that's been there. Because you're going to put your tent on there, you're going to sleep on it. So remove any stones before we put our tent up. So the fourth thing I'm looking at doing is the water flow. So if I've chosen an area that's quite close to water, like a stream or a river, don't get too close to it, because if it rains in the night, your tent may end up being sailing away down that river as the water rises. Now, also to think about is when you put your tent down, if it's on the flat piece of ground, don't have it next to a hill, because if you're at the bottom of the hill, again, if it rains, the water will run down the hill and you may end up being in a bit of a puddle come the morning. Now, another thing to think about on that point of thing is, even though you looked for a nice smooth pitch, don't have a little bit of a ditch, because obviously water will collect down into the ditch, and again, we may end up in a puddle. And then we're thinking about trees. Okay, so again, don't park up next to trees or by the edge of trees, because the branches at the night, if it's a windy night, you don't want the branch falling on your head or over your tent, because your tent is just a piece of fabric. It's not like bricks and mortar. It'll fall on it, it'll collapse, and it could hurt you quite badly. Also, wildlife sometimes sits in trees, like birds. You don't want to be waking up and your tent's a different colour due to the amount of bird poop throughout the night. Try to keep away from tree branches and everything else. Okay, another thing we need to think about is the size of the pitch. So choose an area where how tent can actually fit on. You also want to think about not just the actual ground sheet area, but when you put your guy lines out and everything else. So don't think about on the top of a mountain or anything else where there's no space. And also you need to think about others. If you're in a group of people and they've got another tent, then you need to have enough space between each tent. You don't want to be halfway through the night tripping over guy lines and then falling over onto somebody else's tent, because I'm sure they'll not be too happy about that. And also when we're cooking, so this is the last point, is when we're cooking, we want to be enough space away from our tent. So, and if other people are near us, exactly the same. We want a bit of a space. So in case there's an accident with the stove, it explodes or anything else, you don't want it to be right next to your tent and woof, tent goes up. Again, not a very good night when you've got no tent. So the Vango Banshee 300 is a reasonably priced tent, around £150. It has a reasonably high hydrostatic head of 5,000 millimeters. Now, what is a hydrostatic head, you may ask? Well, I'll tell you. The hydrostatic head is the measure of water resistance of your tent material. It measures how tall a column of water on the fabric can hold before the water starts to seep through the weave. So a hydrostatic head of 5,000 millimeters means that the height of the column of water is 5,000 millimeters tall. So the Banshee 300 is a non-freestanding tent. This is classed as a tunnel tent. The weight of this tent is just over 6 pounds, so 6.06 pounds, which is 2.75 kilograms. The material is a Vango Protect 70D polyester. It has a TBS system, which is tension banding system, and that makes it more stable. The dimensions of the tent is 280 centimeters by 220 centimeters, but the maximum height you can sit up is 94 centimeters. It also has a pack size of 48 centimeters by 16 centimeters. Well, you can change that a little bit. You can take the poles out of the package, and then you can put them down the internal side of your rucksack, and then you can pack the inner tent and fly sheet down a little bit more. Although Vango say this is a 3-person tent, if you see how many people, if you see the diagram up here, then you'll realise that one person out of the 3 is going to have their head against other people's toes. So if you have some wigglers or kickers in the night, that person who's got their head next to their feet could end up having a bit of a kick in the face. Also, hopefully nobody's got smelly feet. So I would suggest it's more of a 2-person tent with a little bit more space than a very cramped, snug 3-person tent. So with that saying, let's go and put this tent up. So with the bag, it comes with clips on either side. Undo the clips, undo the bag, and open it up. Inside we've got the poles for the pegs, and then we've got the tent. Now fortunately this tent, the inner tent and the fly sheet are attached together. Now some tents might be a point that they're separated, in which case it might be that you put the inner tent up first, or you might put up the fly sheet first. With this particular one, you can put up both of them at the same time. Now the reason why a fly sheet tent first is better, because if you get to your campsite and it's raining, then you don't want to put the inner tent up first, because by the time you've got your fly sheet up, the inner tent is going to be wet, which means you're going to have a wet night. So you really want to have a fly sheet first, or one that's actually built in together, so then you're going to keep your inner tent from being dry. So what we're going to do is we're going to move the bag to one side. Now what I usually do is I grab a peg, because what I want to do is I'm going to keep everything together. So all my tent is going to go back in my bag at some point. So I use the cord that's attached to the bag, and I just put a tent peg to it, and that holds it to the ground. And I can do the same with this when I'm using my pegs and my pole, just attach the bags to the ground. So while I'm putting up the tent, so my bag isn't going to blow away. So we're going to roll the tent out. Now the grey bit is the ground sheet. Just stretch the ground sheet out. Once I've got the whole of the tent out, spaces are already sorted out. So next thing I want to do is get my poles. Or actually, well, I said, get another peg. Because if we've got a windy day, again, I don't want my tent blowing off the mountain. When I turn back and the tent's gone like a parachute. So I'm going to get one of the peg points, and I'm just going to peg it down, and then it'll be secured to the ground. Now the thing is, when I'm pegging it down, I'll show you a little bit closer. One peg's got a hook on it. The hook wants to face outwards. We're going to put the peg in on a 45-degree angle, so it goes, A, goes into the ground easier, and B, it secures a bit easier. If you want to put it in straight in like that, it makes it harder because you're going straight in, and you may find a stone that way. Get it in on a 45-degree angle. when we're doing so, when we're pushing the peg in, don't try and use your boot or anything else. If you've got a mallet, use it. If not, use this part of your hand and push it in that way. If the ground is a bit harder, then maybe if you haven't got a mallet with you, maybe use a stone and tap it in. Okay? Don't use your boot, because the thing is, when you've got your rubber sole or your boot, you can't feel how your peg is going in. And if you go to a point that you get to a stone and you push down with your foot, you may end up bending the peg, which again is something you've got to sort out later. And the more times you bend it, the weaker the pegs become. So the best way, 45-degree angle, and we push it into the ground like that. The hook of the peg hangs outwards. So that's what I'm going to do here. Right through the loop, 45-degree angle, and then I push it in. I don't have to push it all the way in, because we're still securing the tent properly. Now, once I've done that, I can get my poles. Now this particular tent's got 2 sets of poles, and they're colour coded, so you know which part of the tent it's going to go into. Same with the other one. I want to feed the poles in, but when I do it, I'm going to feed them in one direction. I'm going to try and remember in the morning which way I did it, so then I'm going to try and continue to feed that pole out in the same direction. Just makes it easier, and it reduces any chance of your poles bending or any rips in the fabric. So I'm going to go from this side. So on this pole, this is the middle pole. On the pole it has a red tag on it, and we have a red pole. So I'm going to feed it through the sleeve. Try and just taking my time, not forcing it through. I don't want to rip the canvas, the sleeve, and it's through. And then I'm going to continue pushing it through until this red part goes level with the red tag. I'm going to just lie that down for a moment. I'm going to do the second pole. Feed it through the same way at the bottom. This is a small pole, small sleeve. I'm going to feed this through. Okay, so once I've done this, once we've fed the pole through, the fly sheet has a clip. I'm going to clip that to the pole, like that. Then at the bottom of the pole, in this particular tent, is what we have in the island. So we're going to feed the bottom of the pole into the island. Now, the end of these poles have like a bit of an indentation in it, so we can clip it into place. So that's in there. I'm going to do exactly the same on this side. I'm going to find the eyelet, bend the pole round. It does have a bit of give to it, and then we're going to clip it on this side as well. So do exactly the same with this pole. On the eyelet, checking this the right way around, clip it in. These clips on now, because this is a large pole, it's got 2 clips on this one. Do one on the top. Right, so now I need to stop pegging it out. So first of all, I'm going to grab 4 pegs. So where each place I put a pole, there's a loop base and push down. Now, as I said, this has tension strapping. So these are the straps here. So this will make out in the, so it'll make a rectangle shape. Again, for the loop, 45-degree angle, push in. So that's 4 pegs in there. Now we're going to start to make the shape of the tent. If I get the pegs out, what I always do, put them in my pocket, makes it easier. So now we're going to start putting the tent up. Now what I want to do here is do it first. So I've already got one peg that was in, so what we'll do is extend this one out, get it straight. Now the thing is, what you want to do, the line of this webbing strap to go in level with the seam of your fly sheet. The seam go down here, so continue to go down the line. Really tight. So our pole stands up now. Again, this side. And follow the seam. We're starting to get a bit of a structure already. So now we're going to go and do the front. Exactly the same way. Find the seam, the web strap, peg into the loop, pull it forward, and just make a 45 degree angle and use the palm of my hand. Now the ground is quite moist at the moment because we're autumn. Now this one also has one in the middle. And this is exactly the same seam, 45 degree angles. So that's now we've actually got the construction of the tent really well built. So I'm going to push my clip in. So that's more secure now. What I want to do now is with my guy lines at the back. So, grab the loop, in, exactly the same, again, follow the seam of the fly sheet, 45 degree angle, push it in. If I need to make it any tighter, I can do so by tightening the guy line. And that is it. That's how we bought the Vango Banshee 300. As I say, now what I'm doing is gather my bits and pieces together, put them together, pull my peg out, and that's it done. So, as I said, it's got 2 doors. It has a vestibule on either side, or a porch area for the outlet, which is quite the outer tent. And that's probably a big enough space to put your boots and your cooking system, so your stove. The rest of the stuff you're probably going to put inside your clothes and obviously your sleeping bag. Your rucksack. What I generally would do with this tent is I would use one side for going in and out of, and the opposite side I would put all my boots and my stove and everything else. So it makes it a little bit tidier. So look at the side. Got 2 doors. Travel up the door. Front section there is a space that you can put extra bits of equipment in between the fly sheet and the inner tent. There's a pocket as well. So this is how to put up a tent. So all you need to know now is how to put it down. Now quite easy to do is in reverse of how I put it up. So we're going to just go through that. So first things first, I've got my excess pegs. Put them in peg bags. Okay, got my parts to the bag, so I'm not going to lose anything. I'm going to be able to put it away just the way I put it together. The first thing I want to do zip up the door. What I want to do next is do my guy lines. So pulling out the peg, quite easy enough. Put your finger underneath and pull it out. Now what I do is I hold the guy line, pull it tight against it, and it cleans the peg down. I'm going to put the peg on the bag, or alternatively I can put it back in my pocket. I don't want to be leaving it on the floor because I may lose a couple of pegs, and when I get to the next campsite I've run a couple of pegs short. So look after all my equipment. Next thing I want is the guy lines, wrap them up, goes around my hand a few times, take it off, and then the excess cordage, wrap it round, and then tuck it through. And I'm going to do the same on the rest of the guy lines. Right, guy lines are down. Next thing I want to do is start to undo the pegs. Take the tin plate, undo it, clean it out, take my excess hold off. Pole. So first what we can do is undo the clip. Remember there's two clips on the big pole. Undo the end. Okay. Now the same as if you remember at the start, what we said is that we're going to push the poles out the way that we went in. Collapse the poles. Poles go back into the bag. The last one we're going to do is pack up the tent. Do is I don't want to get the inner tent wet, so all I'm going to do is if the fly sheet is a bit damp in the morning because of dew or anything else or it's been raining, I want to keep the fly sheet so it's not touching the inner tent. Also the ground sheet might be a bit wet because it's been on the ground. Again, do not try and get it to touch the inner tent. I want to get the inner tent wet. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to turn it in to a third of the way. Same on this side, third of the way. See, even though this tends to be only up and down, it's already collected moisture on the ground sheet. So what I'm going to do again, I'm going to fold it over again. Get that. I'm going to check all the straps are inwards, and next I want to do my bag to the tent, the outer bag, put it at the end. What we want to do now is roll it off quite tight, checking all the straps are going into the middle, and get all the air out while I'm doing so. poles and pegs, put them into the bag, cinch it up, this particular bag, clip it together. If you put it on your rucksack and you can't get it inside your tent, then using these straps you can actually connect it to the outside. Whatever you do, don't want to lose your tent, because when you get to campsite, again, you're not going to have a pleasant night's sleep. The worst thing is backtracking across fields at night time, you just can't find your tent. So make it secure to your rucksack, preferably inside, if you can't, then on the outside. So there you go, that's the Vango Banshee 300, and that is also how to put up a tent and put it away. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. If you have, a like would be great. Please subscribe, and if you like hiking, backpacking, long distance walking, and like to learn some skills and tips about the great outdoors, then please consider subscribing. So with that saying, thanks for watching, look after yourselves, keep safe, and bye-bye hikers.